I'm Candice Malcom, and welcome to the Candice Malcom Show. We've got a big show for you today. Lots happening in the news right now. We're going to jump right into it. As you probably saw, we are now in the middle of a trade war. So as of 12:01 a.m. Eastern Time today, March 4th, the United States, citing national security reasons, started taxing all Canadian and Mexican goods at 25%, except for Canadian energy, which will be taxed at a lower rate of 10%. So immediately following that, the Canadian counter tariffs have been also put into effect. They will be placed on $30 billion worth of products starting today. And then we are told that they're going to rise to $155 million on March 25th. So here we are in the middle of a trade war, and we are waiting for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to come and speak to Canadians. He was supposed to be on an hour ago at 10 o'clock, but we are still waiting for him. They bumped it to 10:30, and here it is, 11:05 Eastern Time. Still no sign of the Prime Minister. Nothing says urgently addressing an emergency like the Prime Minister just strolling into a press conference an hour late. Well, folks, as soon as that goes live, we will throw to it. But in the meantime, I'd like to welcome our guest for the program today. Pleased to be joined by Hamish Marshall. Hamish is a pollster. He is a partner at One Persuasion, which is a government relations and strategy firm in Ontario. Hamish, welcome to the program. Whoops, I don't think your audio is working there, Hamish.
Oh, yeah, great to be here. All good.
Well, you know what? It's funny because today is Shrove Tuesday. It's Pancake Day. My kids and I had like this wonderful morning. We woke up, we made pancakes, we were talking about Easter. It was just like a nice, normal morning. And then I turn on my phone and I'm like, oh yeah, the world is on fire. And so that kind of quickly imploded there. But so yeah, basically Trump told us this was happening yesterday in the White House. He said that it was coming forward. Here is President Trump speaking about the tariffs yesterday.
Very importantly, tomorrow tariffs 25% on Canada and 25% on Mexico, and that'll start. So they're going to have a tariff. So what they have to do is build their car plants, frankly, and other things in the United States, in which case they have no tariffs.
And then we also, Trump was asked whether there was room for a deal to be made. Was there going to be an 11th hour deal? Remember, initially these tariffs were supposed to come in February, and then Trump bumped it. So here's a question, is there any room left? And Trump just closing the door on that and saying, no, this is happening.
On the tariffs, is there any room left for Canada and Mexico to make a deal before midnight? And should we expect those Chinese tariffs, the extra 10%, to take effect tomorrow?
No room left for Mexico or for Canada. No, the tariffs, they're all set. They go into effect tomorrow.
So it's here, it's happening. We've had a few months warning, Hamish. We knew that this was coming. We knew that Trump was serious about it. It doesn't seem like Canada really came up with another strategy or plan. We didn't diversify. We didn't open up new trading lanes. I don't think we made any progress on opening up interprovincial trade barriers or building new pipelines. It just seems like we were kind of caught flat-footed, again, maybe hoping that something would change, but it didn't. And now it's upon us. What's your takeaway from all this so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think the approach of the Liberal government has been just to hope. You know, there was tariffs supposed to come in when Trump was first elected. Then it was going to be February 1st, and we kind of got through those hurdles. And we thought appointing a fentanyl czar would be enough, and apparently, it wasn't. It's still not clear to me exactly what Trump wants per se. He talks about national security. He talks about trade.
Sorry to interrupt you here, Hamish. We have Justin Trudeau, so we're gonna go live to the Prime Minister, hear what he has to say, and then we'll come back to you. Let's go live to Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada.
Today, the United States launched a trade war against Canada. Their closest partner and ally, the closest friend. At the same time, they're talking about working positively with Russia, appeasing Vladimir Putin, a lying, murderous dictator. Make that make sense. Canadians are reasonable, and we are polite, but we will not back down from a fight. Not when our country and the well-being of everyone in it is at stake. At the moment, the U.S. tariffs came into effect in the early hours of this morning, and so did the Canadian response. Canada will be implementing 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods. starting with tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods immediately, and tariffs on the remaining $125 billion of American products in 21 days' time. Encore aujourd'hui, on se voit forcé d'imposer des droits de douane de 25% sur 155 milliards de dollars américains de marchandises. 30 milliards de marchandises américaines, excusez-moi. 30 milliards de dollars de façon immédiate et dans 21 jours, 125 milliards de dollars de marchandises de plus. Today, we will also be challenging these illegal actions by filing dispute resolution claims at the World Trade Organization and through the USMCA. But in the meantime, our tariffs will remain in place until the US tariffs are withdrawn, and not a moment sooner. And should these tariffs not cease, we are in active and ongoing discussions with provinces and territories to pursue several non-tariff measures, measures which will demonstrate that there are no winners in a trade war. Now, just like I did a month ago, I want to speak first directly to the American people. We don't want this. We want to work with you as a friend and ally. And we don't want to see you hurt either. But your government has chosen to do this to you. As of this morning, markets are down, and inflation is set to rise dramatically all across your country. Your government has chosen to put American jobs at risk, that the thousands of workplaces that succeed because of materials from Canada or because of consumers in Canada, or both. They've chosen to raise costs for American consumers on everyday essential items like groceries and gas, on major purchases like cars and homes, and everything in between. They've chosen to harm American national security, impeding access to the abundant critical minerals, energy, building materials, and fertilizers that we have and that the United States needs to grow and prosper. They've chosen to launch a trade war that will, first and foremost, harm American families. They've chosen to sabotage their own agenda that was supposed to usher in a new golden age for the United States. And they've chosen to undermine the incredible work we've done together to tackle the scourge that is fentanyl, a drug that must be wiped from the face of the earth. So on that point, let me be crystal clear. There is absolutely no justification or need whatsoever for these tariffs today. Now, the legal pretext your government is using to bring in these tariffs is that Canada is apparently unwilling to help in the fight against illegal fentanyl. Well, that is totally false. Let's look at the facts. Our border is already safe and secure. Far less than 1% of fentanyl flows and less than 1% of illegal crossings into the United States comes from Canada. But we acted because we know we can always do better. We responded to concerns, including from the President, by implementing an ambitious $1.3 billion border plan. A border plan that includes generational investments in new AI and imaging tools to stop the flow of fentanyl in its tracks, stronger coordination and information sharing with American agencies, along with the deployment of drones, helicopters, and additional personnel to keep our border secure. Now, a month ago, as part of an agreement with the United States that paused the tariffs, we made further commitments. We appointed Kevin Brosseau as our fentanyl czar, a man who dedicated his multi-decade career in law enforcement to combating organized crime networks and drug trafficking. We designated 7 drug cartels sick, evil groups who cynically profit off the pain and suffering of people on both sides of the border as the terrorist organizations that they are. And just yesterday, we launched a new joint operations partnership supported by a $200 million investment between Canada's security and law enforcement agencies, a partnership that will enhance the coordination of information and intelligence in order to thwart criminal gangs involved in the illegal fentanyl trade. And critically, our actions are working. As the U.S. Customs and Border Protection just acknowledged, there was a 97% drop in fentanyl seizures from January compared to December, to a near zero low of less than half an ounce seized in January, even with all the further enforcements and actions we've taken at the borders. In sum, we stepped up. We engaged closely and constructively with the President and his administration. We did everything we promised. We stuck to our word. And we did it because we believe in working together to protect our citizens. Now I want to speak directly to one specific American, Donald. In the over 8 years you and I have worked together, we've done big things. We signed a historic deal that has created record jobs and growth in both of our countries. We've done big things together on the world stage, as Canada and the US have done together for decades, for generations. And now we should be working together to ensure even greater prosperity for North Americans in a very uncertain and challenging world. Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do. We two friends fighting is exactly what our opponents around the world want to see. And now, to my fellow Canadians, I won't sugarcoat it. This is going to be tough, even though we're all going to pull together, because that's what we do. We will use every tool at our disposal so Canadian workers and businesses can weather this storm. From expanding EI benefits and making them more flexible to providing direct supports to businesses, we will be there as needed to help. But Canada, make no mistake, no matter how long this lasts, no matter what the cost, the federal government and other orders of government will be there for you. We will defend Canadian jobs. We will take measures to prevent predatory behavior that threatens Canadian companies because of the impacts of this trade war, leaving them open to takeovers. We will relentlessly fight to protect our economy. We will stand up for Canadians every single second of every single day, because this country is worth fighting for. Les derniers mois.
Okay, we can cut it there, Sean. So, I mean, Justin Trudeau kind of coming out and giving the speech of his life, basically, and really like spelling it out. First of all, he takes kind of an unnecessary jab at the beginning, talking about Putin. I think he's trying to like insert himself into the dispute that happened last week, calling him an atrocious murderer. His tone was kind of condescending at the beginning, Hamish. Especially when he was talking to Americans, because he was telling Americans that they were going to feel the pain. And all I was thinking was, no, man, it's the Canadians that are going to feel the pain. Like that, yes, there will be pockets of Americans that will feel this, but their economy is just so much larger than ours. Ours is such a fraction of it, so much more dependent upon their economy for trade than vice versa. So the message that he was supposedly giving to Americans, I felt like it really should have been aimed at Canadians. That moment where he was talking to President Trump one-on-one, I thought that was actually quite effective, even though I cringe when I hear politicians using first names to one another. I just think it's really inappropriate. But, we were talking about that with President Zelensky in the Oval Office, and he kept referring to the vice president as JD, which I didn't like that. But basically just saying there's no justification or need whatsoever for these tariffs, spelling out what the Canadians had done to improve the border, to crack down on fentanyl. I think that those are all really reasonable, good points, Hamish. But to me, there was he was missing the forest for the tree. Some of the major takeaways here. It's like Justin Trudeau does not have a mandate at this moment. President Trump does not like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Part of the reason that we're in here, you have to believe, is that these two individuals just don't see eye to eye. They don't like each other. They kind of enjoy making a spectacle of one another because their politics are so opposite. So we don't have a strong government in Canada that just came in with a mandate. We have a lame duck leader who's loathed and despised by the people on his way out. He shouldn't be up there, right? He resigned on January 6th. We could have had a federal election. We could have had an election. He could have put someone else in. They could have had the election. We could be sitting here on March 4th with a new, fresh mandate and a new leader. But instead, Justin Trudeau has decided for himself to go out this way, proroguing Parliament, having a long leadership review process, and they're going to put in their new prime minister on Sunday. To me, that's a story that Trudeau just seems to be completely missing. What's your take on it?
Look, I think a lot of this is a result of Trudeau's weakness and Trudeau's disastrous time as prime minister, right? Canada, the reason Trump is coming after Canada in a large sense, and I agree that it's not about specific security or national defense issues or even drug issues that are sort of the fig leaves for this, is that he sees Canada as an easy source of places to get jobs. He wants, one of his core promises and what he wants to deliver is more manufacturing jobs, specifically manufacturing jobs in the United States. Those are good, high-paying jobs that will go to places and to the sort of people who are Trump supporters. That is something he sees he wants to deliver for his people. And part of that is to bring jobs back from China, but that takes time. The easier thing to do is to create instability in the relationship with Canada and frankly with Mexico, so that if you're somebody who relies on shipping auto parts across the border, even if these tariffs go away in 2, 3, 6 months, 6 weeks, I don't know, to say, I don't want to go through this again. I'm just going to move my auto parts plant from Windsor, Ontario, and we're going to move it down to Kentucky or somewhere because I just don't want to have that sort of disruption. So the disruption is the purpose, and that's what Trump's trying to do. And when Trudeau is saying this is going to hurt, and he's right, it's going to hurt Americans. You're absolutely right. It's going to hurt Canadians a heck of a lot more. That's also kind of the point. Trump wants that pain. He wants the disruption so that people say, I don't want to deal with this garbage anymore and just move my plants or our factories south of the border. That's what he's trying to do. And, we're in a position as Canadians in our Canadian economy that we have less ability to stand up to that today than we did 10 years ago because of persistent decisions Trudeau has made. You're right. Trudeau is, being a weak leader and that Trump sees him as a weak leader. And since Freeland resigned and then Trudeau has resigned, the weakness has only gotten more. And that's why Trump's pushing hard today, because, if the Liberal, I honestly believe if the Liberal leadership had been set that we had a prime minister, 2 days ago, as opposed to, in 5 or 6 days, and we had a new leader, the tariffs would have come in a week ago. He's coming in when he's hitting us when Canada's at its weakest, and we're the weakest right now with Justin Trudeau.
And it seems like our response, Hamish, is not going to help. Like the whole idea here that we're throwing retaliatory tariffs on the U.S., it's a tax on Canadians. A retaliatory tariff is a tax on Canadians. So the hurt that Canadians are going to feel, it's going to be a little bit from what Trump is doing, but it's a lot more what our own leaders are doing. So here is Doug Ford appearing on American News last night and NBC News with Aaron Gilchrist, basically saying that they're going to shut down the electricity going to the United States so that the Americans will feel the pain like they've never felt before.
If he wants to destroy our economy and our families, I will shut down the electricity going down to the U.S. And I'm telling you, we will do it. It's unfortunate. I would rather ship you more electricity. We're the number one trading customer to 28 states. And a lot of them are red states. They're going to feel the pain like they've never felt before.
So I'm not sure if Canada stops selling electricity to the Americans, I'm sure the Americans will find another way to get it. I mean, we might feel some pain there. But to me, there's going to be a longer term pain felt by Canadians because who else are we going to sell to? It's not like you have an option to go to another market with something like that. What do you think of
Well, I think actually the non-tariff actions like blocking electricity, and I think the other thing, the most interesting word the Prime Minister said in the entire speech was fertilizer. He called out the Americans need our fertilizer. We have enormous potash reserves that are it's key to making fertilizer. Much of the modern world depends on, frankly, on fertilizer and our ability to generate, and the Americans' ability to generate huge amounts of food. If he says we're going to stop potash exports to the United States, that gets very, very interesting because those are things that, yes, they can buy potash from other places, but it will be much, much more expensive and it takes time for those to come in. And that's even more true with electricity. With potash, you're shipping it around in containers and you buy it from Australia or somewhere else, and it takes a while to ship, but shipping containers are shipping containers. Electricity, you've got the wires. You can't just throw some electricity in a boat and move it somewhere else. So will the Americans be able to make up the electricity by firing up some old plants and things? Perhaps, but that will take time. It will cost a lot of money and have a very immediate impact on the price of a lot of things in the United States. Most notably, that have an impact on those manufacturing plants because they are enormous consumers of electricity. So, and frankly, while Canada, a lot of the electricity that we sell to the United States, particularly from Quebec, but some from Ontario, is generated by hydropower. So it's very easy to let the water run over the dam and decide not to generate that electricity. So turning that off is actually something we can do without a lot of impact for us. So I think that is ultimately where it's going to be the most effective, is looking at the non-tariff things that they can only get to Canada from Canada because our economies are so integrated, our infrastructure is so integrated, is much more effective than, to your point, some tariffs that are going to hurt Americans, but only a little bit.
Well, it's interesting. So I want to play this clip. This is Dr. Ian Lee, who is a professor, I believe, at Carleton in business. And he was on the CBC explaining what tariffs are and basically saying that when you look at the studies, when you look at the data, there is no redeeming argument whatsoever for a retaliatory tariff. It doesn't do what we want it to do. It's not going to impact the Americans. So let's play this clip and then I'll get your response to it, Hamish.
Adrian,
go ahead.
Jump in on that?
You bet.
I want to put forward the other point of view. Governor Malcolm gave an unbelievably superb speech February 21st to Oakville Chamber of Commerce, and he outlined very empirically and factually the extraordinary destructive impact of tariffs on the economy, on investment, on inflation, on the price of goods. And I went through that speech, the written document, very, very carefully multiple times. I couldn't find any redeeming arguments to support retaliatory tariffs. They're going to be very destructive for us. And so putting tariffs on top of tariffs, and remember, the Canadian tariffs will be on Canadians. So when the government says 100 billion or 200 billion, that's a tax on Canadians. And then the argument is that somehow going to cause Mr. Trump to change his mind. And, it's such a huge economy. We say these amounts are large. $100 billion is a big amount. Mm-hmm. The U.S. economy is somewhere between 25 and 30 trillion dollars, depending on how you measure GDP, without getting into the weeds. So, $100 billion on a 25 to 30 trillion dollar economy is like finding a loony on the sidewalk and thinking you've made it rich. It's statistically insignificant.
It's statistically insignificant. I like that analogy of finding a loony. So as much as we push back, it's not really going to affect them. I want to just play one more clip because it did remind me when I had the opportunity to sit down with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, I asked him about this because one of the things that I'm not quite there on is this idea that the Conservatives agree with this measure, that the Conservatives are there saying yes to Justin Trudeau. We agree. We want these retaliatory tariffs because really what they are is a tax on Canadians. So I'm going to play that clip and then I'll go back to you, Hamish. Trudeau said that they would issue retaliatory tariffs against the Americans, 25%. You came out in a basic agreement with that, saying that you would also support. So my question is, a tariff that Canada imposes is really just a 25% tax on the goods that we import. So it's a 25% tax on what Canadians pay for. So why is a Conservative leader agreeing with basically a 25% Liberal tax increase?
Well, I don't agree with any liberal tax increase of any kind ever. But I do believe that if a foreign government attacks Canadian industry, that we have to retaliate. That is the only tool we have to deter. These tariff threats from the United States are utterly unjustified. There is no justification for what President Trump is threatening on Canada.
So that was back on February 13th, but the issue still remains pertinent. So I hear your point that the other measures that are non-tariff measures might be more effective than the tariffs themselves. I'm not a fan of a 25% tax on Canadians, and I don't think it's going to work, right? Like if we were at the point where we turn on this tax and it actually has a devastating impact on the American economy, and Trump wakes up tomorrow morning and says, "This is a big mistake, I'm going to undo them." I don't see that happening. So at this point, I just don't understand why Canada's in such a weak position. Why are we making ourselves weaker with this tax?
Well, I mean, I agree with Mr. Poilievre. I think you have to stand up for yourselves. I think you have to. There will be an impact, and as I think one of the commenters made, in a lot of red states, which I think is good, which I think it will hopefully help when members of Congress begin to start hearing complaints from their constituents. That will filter up to the president, hopefully. But I also think the other thing Mr. Poilievre has proposed is a really good idea, saying if we're going to have these tariffs, let's make sure we take any revenue collected from them and put them into immediate tax cuts for Canadians, so that if we are going to all have to pay more for certain things that are imported, we'll have a little more money in our pocket. And I appreciate that that's not, that will allow people to get ahead to some extent in a very difficult situation. But I think we do have to stand up for ourselves, because the most important thing, I think, from the beginning is that, as I said at the very beginning of this, Trump smells weakness. And I think if we don't put anything back, he'll just see it as more weakness, and he'll say, great, 25%, let's make it 35. So I think we have to stand up for ourselves and say that we are going to have to inflict some pain going the other way as well, while recognizing it's not, we can do far less damage to the American economy than they can to us.
Well, here is Immigration Minister Mark Miller. He was on CBC, and he said that it's okay because Canadians, he says, have a higher pain threshold, apparently, than Americans. Let's play that clip.
And it will continue to be important to diversify our economies, but we can't replace an economy that is responsible for 80% of our trade overnight, and it's going to hurt. My message to Canadians is that we have a higher pain threshold than our partners to the south of us. We can continue to fight. We will have to bring the fight, and it will hurt Americans as well.
And not to be outdone, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh was out there last night saying that it's time for Trudeau to basically kick Donald Trump out of the G7 and uninvite him from the upcoming G7 meeting in Alberta. Let's play that clip.
Given that we are the host of the G7 summit, and given that Donald Trump has threatened our very sovereignty, threatened our economic security, we should not invite Donald Trump to the G7. It doesn't make any sense to do so. As a host, we should work with other countries to develop a strategy on how we can resist the very dangerous ideas that Donald Trump's putting forward, and that should be the focus of the summit.
I mean, forget about Singh's comments there because they're silly, but it will be interesting. I mean, we have this meeting coming up. Trump will be there, and we will have a new prime minister. Maybe we'll have two new prime ministers by then, but it won't be Justin Trudeau, and I think that will be a meeting to watch. What's your takeaway from some of these reactions we're seeing?
I mean, I think Mark Miller's trying to sort of play to some sort of bizarre version of Canadian nationalism. He couldn't even get through the line about a higher pain threshold without sort of smirking and laughing himself. He knew it was ridiculous, and when he was saying it, it's just absurd, and it really shows just how the Liberals are. This is serious business, and they can't quite manage to deal with these serious topics, and it's one of the reasons why we're in this mess. Obviously Singh is just being silly and further proving how absolutely inadequate he is for anything remotely approaching the levers of power. Look, Donald Trump's a deal maker. He prides himself on a deal maker. If there's anything he sees himself as, it's a deal maker. Frankly, an in-person meeting at a summit in Canada, that's an opportunity for something. And I think Trump sees this. The meeting is in 3 or 4 months, I believe, and that is about enough time for Trump to make a point with tariffs and to have a new prime minister to make a deal with. I think Trump might see it as an opportunity to make a deal, and it could be an opportunity to do so. And I think Canadians would be foolish to turn our back on that opportunity to come up with some sort of deal that will last through the rest of the Trump presidency.
Well, because I have you, I just have to take it over and talk about the polling, because we have just seen a spectacular change in fortunes, right? Like I came back and started doing my show in early January. Coming back from maternity leave, and at that point, the Conservatives looked like they were going to walk away with the largest majority in a generation, and it seemed just like a matter of time. Like Justin Trudeau needs to step down. When the election comes, we will see this change. And then you look at what has happened basically since that time, since January, and just the spectacular change. I think we have that graph that everyone has been pointing at. So Conservative lead, just in the last 3 months there, has basically all but disappeared. We've had you on the show a few times, Hamish, to sort of help us understand whether the polls were real, whether it was something that the media was manufacturing, or somehow were they overreading a trend. It still confuses me, because the latest Ipsos poll, which came out on February 23rd, shows that the Liberals are actually beating the Conservatives by 2 points, and that would be the first time that the Liberals have been ahead in a poll since 2021. Still very close, but it shows Liberals clearly ahead. But then after that, Abacus data came out, and Abacus has repeatedly found that the Conservatives are ahead. David Coletto is a very reputable pollster, and by no means a conservative. Very fair and balanced, and he's gone out into the field several times to try to see if the Liberal bounce is real. He doesn't seem to be able to find it. So his latest poll shows Conservatives up at 41, Liberals down at 29. Maybe first of all, talk about the discrepancy there, and which poll do you think is more accurate, or are they both off? Like, where do you think we are as a country right now?
So when I see things like that, when I see multiple reputable pollsters coming up with dramatically different results, it clearly shows to me that we have an electorate in turmoil that has extremely soft impressions of everything that's going on. What's very, very clear to me is that people were very, very sick and tired of Justin Trudeau, and they wanted change. With him leaving, they're getting something of change. Carney is even newer to the scene in terms of frontline politics than Mr. Poilievre, and people are checking that out. We're seeing Mr. Carney's running into a lot of trouble where he keeps making things up, and I think things will begin to. The reality of Carney will not line up with the sort of the fantasy version we're getting at the moment. But what we're seeing is that Canadians are just saying, well, thank God Trudeau's gone. We want change. And they're kicking the tires a bit. Is this Carney guy, are the new Liberals, are they actually change? Or is it still the Conservatives? So I don't particularly, when I see two pollsters that are both reputable coming with radically different results, it really is a function of a great deal of unsettlingness, and that neither of them, probably either of the views being measured, are probably too firmly held. And we can expect change, and almost certainly something will be different by the time we get through an election. So we're going into a period of turmoil. We're going into a period where people want change. But we've seen this before, right? When Brian Mulroney stepped down and Kim Campbell became leader of the PCs, they got back into. They went from being at, I think, 12% of the polls back up to being in the lead. When Justin Trudeau's father stepped down and John Turner became the prime minister, again the incumbent government that had been extremely unpopular went back into the lead. People were excited about something different. Just have a different name when you turn on the news and it's not the same person you can't stand. So that's all been going on. We'll see how it lasts, and once we get into an election campaign and people start evaluating, Carney or whoever the Liberal leader is on their own merits. And I think we'll begin to see some convergence in the polls.
Well, it is interesting when you look at some of the crosstabs here. So Abacus poll asked Canadians, what is the top issue that you are looking at in the election? And it shows, if we could show that on the screen there, 61% of Canadians still say that the rising cost of living is the top concern. But what has popped all the way up to second place there is Donald Trump and his administration. And my guess is that number would be even higher after the news that we're getting today. The two issues are sort of becoming linked, because people will feel a greater economic pain thanks to these tariffs. And then the next one that I want to show is, who do you believe is the party best able to handle these issues? And so you can see that when it comes to cost of living, 37% trust the Conservatives, only 21% say Liberals. But then when it comes to Trump, it's 29% Conservatives and 39% Liberals. There's a couple of other issues that favor Conservatives, including immigration and crime, which are also big issues. But I think that the two big ones there are sort of split. So I want to ask you a bit of a strategy question, Hamish, because some people on the political right are upset with Pierre Poilievre saying that he shouldn't be taking the same position when it comes to tariffs, that maybe he should try to be seen as more reconciliatory towards Trump and trying to strike a deal. Now, that probably would seem like political suicide to people who are more Liberal voters, and Trump obviously is not a beloved character in Canada. I think most people, the majority of Canadians, overwhelming majority, have a negative opinion on him. So what do you think that there is, that part of the issue here is that Poilievre doesn't have the right strategy?
No, I think Poilievre's got the right strategy. I think he's moved to change. You know, obviously things changed since Trudeau stepped down, and these Trump tariffs have dominated the landscape. And I think he's got the right strategy rolling ahead by explaining how he would do things differently. And a great example really is taking that any money collected from tariffs and using it to cut taxes to make life more affordable. It's interesting. The Liberals are just talking about pain. They're not talking about doing anything on the other side to make life in any way more affordable for Canadians, which has been what they frankly have done for the last 3 or 4 years as we've gone through this inflationary period. So I think Mr. Poilievre is on the right approach. I think sucking up to Donald Trump at this point would be absolute political suicide in this country. I think that I know lots of people who are Trump supporters, many of whom are backing away from that now. He's showing he is absolutely no fan of Canada, no friend to our country, doesn't value the relationship we have with the United States at any level, and that while some people might still like some of the things that Mr. Trump's doing in the United States, that there is not a market for that political position in Canada. And I think a conciliatory tone, frankly, Mr. Trump would simply see that as more weakness and more ability to push even further and to try to get even more of a change deal, whatever that looks like, that's even better for him. So I think the approach is the right one. Look, the Liberals have a long history of standing up to Americans. It's been part of their brand identity for a very, very long time. So I'm not surprised they're ahead as a party on that issue. I think it's striking that every other issue except for climate change and Trump, the Conservatives lead the Liberals even on things like healthcare and housing, and it's pretty striking. But you're right; it's certainly a challenge. But I think Mr. Poilievre's on the right track. Has got further to go, but he's on the right track, and we'll see how things play out in time.
Well, so this must have been a gift to Poilievre then. Trump was speaking in an interview with Spectator magazine, a U.S. publication, but an American journalist, on Friday, and he said that basically President Trump took aim at Pierre Poilievre, saying his biggest problem is he's not a MAGA guy, not a Trump guy at all. I think we have an audio clip of this. Let's go to that.
Well, I think his biggest problem is he's not a MAGA guy, you know? I mean, he's really not. He's not a Trump guy at all.
He's more of a throwback Republican.
He's different.
Yeah.
Making a big mistake. They all make that mistake, you know. They think they're going to be the tough guy and they're going to knock out Trump.
Yeah.
And they end up getting the hell beat out of him. So I don't know. I mean, I can't tell you, Pierre.
So this gave Poilievre the opportunity to hit back. And did we lose our video here? Okay, we might have to go audio only. This gives Pierre Poilievre the opportunity to hit back and basically just say, I'm not MAGA. You're right, President Trump. I'm not MAGA. He puts out this tweet saying that, Mr. President, is true. I'm not MAGA. I'm for Canada first. Always. Canada's always been America's best friend and ally. We will never be the 51st state. So, Hamish, what do you make of that? Do you think that this was helpful to Poilievre at all? Do you think that this will help break the impression that somehow Poilievre won't be strong against Trump?
I think it will. I think that distinction is important, and I think that look, there's a certain part of the left who sort of will always see anybody, to the right of Justin Trudeau as sort of a cartoon villain that all gets together in some sort of global right-wing conspiracy. But I think the fact that we can draw the line so clear, so separately between Poilievre and Trump, I think will be positive for Mr. Poilievre. He's a fierce believer and fighter for Canada, and I think that will come out, continue to come out. The speech he gave back in the middle of February was fantastic, explaining Canada's history and the role that we've played in North America and his vision going forward. I think it was phenomenal, and I think we'll see a lot more of that, and I think that will resonate with Canadians.
Okay, I want to get your opinion on this one because I think Mark Carney is a front runner. I think that there are some issues with him, but I believe that the Liberals will. I mean, he's sort of the person that's been selected to come in and save the Liberal Party from destruction. But Chrystia Freeland is also out there making her case. She was on Real Time with Bill Maher over the weekend. And it was interesting to see, Hamish, because first of all, she throws Justin Trudeau under the bus. Prime Minister Trudeau talks about how virtue signaling and identity politics has been overdone and talks about why she left Trudeau's cabinet. Let's play that clip.
Justin Trudeau, who's on his way out, used to be very popular. I mean, he still has his fans, 3. And they may be asking, why did you turn on him? Because, you were part of his government. What was it?
My party, we're actually called the Liberal Party, and I am an old school Liberal. And Liberals in Canada win when we are focused on people and on what they need in their lives. And we lose when people think that we're focused on virtue signaling and identity politics.
So apparently she's an old school Liberal. I haven't seen much of that over the last few years. I don't know if freezing bank accounts and using the Emergencies Act is really what we would consider old school Liberals. She also takes a swipe at Pierre Poilievre, calling him maple syrup MAGA. Let's play that clip.
And the guy you will be running against, Pierre... How do we say his name? Pierre?
Well, I call him Maple Syrup MAGA or Mini.
So it's funny because Bill Maher's painting it as if it's a given that she's going to be running against Pierre Poilievre. I don't think it's going to happen, but interesting that she's trying to make that happen. She's been using that nickname a lot, calling him Maple MAGA, but I don't think it's resonating. I don't think it works.
No, and I think if you're trying to make someone sound like they're going to be pro-American, associating them with the word maple is probably kind of a poor branding choice. Look, I mean, it just further shows that Chrystia Freeland's the worst communicator in the Western world, and it's one of the reasons why she's not going to be the Liberal leader in a few days.
Well, it was interesting that Mark Carney went on with Jon Stewart, and that's how he launched his campaign. And then you see Freeland on with Bill Maher. So it's interesting that they're choosing to go to an American audience, right? Like the Liberals are this like, hey, they literally fund the Canadian media. They literally bail them out, fund them, put all this cash into CBC. And then when it comes to trying to reach their audience, they know that no one's watching the Canadian show. So they go on the American shows, which tells you everything you need to know. So Hamish, what should we be looking out for on Sunday with the Liberal leadership race being announced? Who do you think is going to win? Do you think it's going to be close? And what should we be looking for?
I think it's going to be Carney. All the indicators seem to be it's him, not just the big endorsements, but a lot of the behind the scenes organizers. This is a race that's about getting people signed up, getting them registered, and then getting them to vote. It's on-ground organization matters a ton. Carney has the money, and he's got a lot of the good organizers with him, so that should make sure he wins. It'll be interesting. The two things I'm looking out for, number one, is overall how many people actually engaged in this process. There's a lot of media hype about Carney. There's a lot of focus in the polls about Carney, but when you look at the pictures of his events, the crowds aren't that big. His engagement on social media is respectable but not incredible. So the number of people who actually came out and voted is going to be extremely important. There's about 400,000 people signed up, but then they have to register and then vote. So we'll see what that number is, and I think it's going to be quite small when you compare it to the over 600,000 who voted in the Conservative leadership race a couple of years ago, or 2.5 years ago. So overall, it's going to be interesting. And then I think we're going to look for other areas, particularly in Quebec. I mean, Mark Carney's French is fairly appalling for someone trying to be prime minister, especially with a large party with a large electoral base in Quebec. And I'll be very interested to see if any of the others, none of whom are frankly, particularly strong sort of Quebec sympathetic politicians, but if they're able to do anything there because of that. So that will be very interesting to see. That's what I'm looking out for.
Well, it is just interesting that Mark Carney, I mean, he's not a politician. He hasn't really done this before. He's never been elected to anything. So if he becomes party leader and prime minister, he'll be a prime minister without being a member of parliament, without having a seat. I don't know that they're going to quickly go to a by-election or just trigger an election. I do want to make a point, though, Hamish, that he'll mention that, I'm not a politician, and kind of use that as a plus, which is something that Donald Trump also says. But for Donald Trump, the thing about him not being a politician was that he was a little rough around the edges, not politically correct. He would make statements that to the political ear sounded outrageous, but to the American, maybe like the middle of the road American, they actually liked what he was saying. And he also had this business background, so he was going to take business mindset and apply it to politics. I'm not saying that's going well, but that was his shtick. With Carney, it's like, what is his career? Well, he's been an unelected bureaucrat who sort of, it seems like he tries to take a lot of credit for things that he may or may not have really been involved in. And his career is that he's a bureaucrat. So, I don't think that is really, this has the same kind of like interest for the people to say like, okay, well, he's not a politician, we'll give him a pass, because he's been operating in this political world for so long. I see that as a major weakness for Carney. But I did want to ask you can comment on that, but I also want to ask you, when do you think that the general election will get triggered? Because we've heard rumors that it might happen immediately, like within 24 or 48 hours. Other people say, no, he's going to want to be prime minister for a month or two and get the hang of it, maybe even wait until the G7 conference. So comment on Carney, and then tell us when you think the election is going to happen.
Yeah, I think politicians saying I'm not a politician is something that nobody believes. The way Trump was able to communicate that is exactly as you said, but he didn't act like a politician. He didn't sound like any politician anybody had ever heard in 2015 and 2016, right? It was completely different. And that's how he didn't have to say I'm not a politician, because he didn't act like one. Mark Carney acts exactly like sort of an Identikit mass-produced politician. And he keeps lying about being involved in political things. Or he claims he helped Paul Martin balance the budget, which he didn't. But also, if you're trying to say you're not part of the system, claiming you are is weird. And then claims that he, was key to saving Canada in the during the global financial crisis, when it was Jim Flaherty making the tough calls. And of course, Jim's not here to defend himself. But again, if he's trying to be a politician, he shouldn't be associating himself with all these political type things. He's completely, I think, doing it completely backwards there. But I will say that, look, the rumor mill in Ottawa, for what it's worth, is that, Carney will get sworn in as prime minister a few days after he wins the Liberal leadership. I'm not sure exactly which day, and then call an election about a week later. That might work. It prevents him having to go for a by-election to get into the House, obviously. Although there is bizarrely a by-election that was called on Sunday for Halifax that's open right now. So maybe he could jump in as a Liberal candidate right now there. But I will say that the last time someone tried this was John Turner, who was not a member of Parliament, became prime minister, and called an election 10 days later and took his party to the worst defeat in Canadian history. So, hopefully that's what happens again.
Okay, well, we'll have to have you back. Hamish, thanks for joining the show. It's always a pleasure to have you on and hear your insights. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back again tomorrow with all the news. I'm Candice Malcom. This is the Candice Malcom Show. Thank you, and God bless.